So when Joe asked me to come to the Quarry Farm this week, he asked me a year ago to take part in the Trouble Begins lecture series. I was absolutely delighted, and I was delighted for three reasons. The first of these is that I've been practicing landscape architecture for 30 years, and I have to say, of all the work that I've done, studying the way humans interact with the landscape and how their interaction changes or doesn't change over time is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm so glad you're here tonight to share that with me. It's great. The second reason is my family has very deep roots in this area. My mother grew up here, and my parents were married at the Park Church in 1951. My grandparents on both sides also are from this area. My father's grandmother was a German immigrant who lived on Clinton Street in that community. And they're all interred at Woodlawn Cemetery together. And it is just great to just reconnect with the area because I don't live in New York State anymore, and it's been great to come back here. So, and I'll be talking about them a little bit more as the evening goes on. And then finally, as Joe mentioned, for the past year I've been engaged in this effort to study the Quarry Farm landscape, how it developed and changed over the time. And the purpose for this is to try to understand ways it can become part of the whole educational and interpretive experience for the scholars that come to Quarry Farm. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different ways we might preserve it. We might bring back some features that are gone, remove some things that are there now that don't belong. And that's the gist of it. So whenever I give a talk about this, I feel like we need to really start back before European settlement and acknowledge our forebears who were the indigenous people that lived in the area. And as you probably know, the original human settlement here was native people, members of the Susquehannock, and then later the Seneca and Cayuga tribes, the Iroquois League of Nations. And these, after the Revolution, during the Revolution, the native people backed the British. So when the Revolution ended, there was an effort on the part of colonists and colonist troops to come and force these people off their land. And you're probably all familiar with the Battle of Newtown, which took place in 1779, and that was an effort to come and become the decisive battle that sort of ended the occupation here. And as you all know probably, and I hope you've been there, that the Battle of Newtown is commemorated at a state park, which is very nearby. So after the native population left, the Shenandoah Valley became available. The land in the Shenandoah Valley became available. And one of the first things that was done was that following the Revolutionary War, there were land patents given to veterans to compensate for their military service. And in the area that we know today is where Elmira is, and it was among them. There were 262 patents given to these veterans. One of them was a veteran named Cornelius Roberts, and I'm not standing in your way. And we discovered that he was given a patent in this area right here, and we believe this is sort of the location of where we're standing today. It was totaling 297 acres. And he held onto this land for quite a bit of time, and then sold it to a man named Robert Covell and his son. Not clear that either of these men, or any of them, built anything on the property, but it was probably used for land speculation. So in the 1820s, the very early settlement of Elmira, it had a very small population. Think of it as a big city today. Back then it was very small and compact. Has anybody ever seen this image before? Yeah, so this is an artist who was based in Ithaca. And this is a view that was painted in 1840. And I think that it's such a great depiction of what this landscape must have looked like, really not too long after settlement began. And it seems to me that the view here is really kind of, from this part of the city, looking out over the village. And you can see that so much of the land was sort of cleared. There wasn't much forestation. And of course, no development. But this didn't remain the picture for long. And beginning in the middle part of the 1800s, development started to expand out from this compact village. And it expanded eastward. And the east part of Elmira became known for its natural resources. And one of these was these natural sulfur springs. And I'm sure many of you have seen this image before. This is the Elmira Watercare, which opened in 1852 at the base of East Hill, kind of where the Newtown and Badger Creeks come together. And this operated for quite some time. And it was a restorative place. It was like a spa. The people that ran it were actually physicians, a husband and wife. And it drew the natural waters from local springs. But that wasn't the only natural resource in the area. So the southern tier of New York State is underlain with a mix of sandstone, limestone, and shale. And when shale is compressed, it becomes slate. And all through the southern tier of New York State, we have a lot of slate, and that actually extends down way into some Pennsylvania. We all know what fracking is, right? So this is partly what slate was partly gave rise to that. There's even an area in Pennsylvania called the Slate Belt, where so many slate quarries operated in these enormous mines. Above where the Watercare was, kind of on the crest of East Hill, there was a very large slate deposit. And in 1853, a gentleman named John Fosnot, spelled many different ways, I found out, purchased 37.5 acres of the Covell's land. And you can see in this image here with the red circle, this is roughly where we are today. And these large peaks that you see here probably were partly underlain with slate. I was driving down 86 yesterday, coming east through Corning from Rochester, and I noticed a whole side of a hill that had been sheared to build 86 or 17 and 86, and it was just completely covered with slate. And that's just all over the place. And Steve, the farm caretaker, will tell you that, and if you've walked around the property, that there's slate all through the land out here. And here's an image of one of the remains of Fosnot's quarry, which is still on the property today. And he operated this quarry for about 15 years or so. So in the 1850s, 1860s, a movement began in this country that was kind of a preoccupation of urban dwelling, wealthy individuals who had acquired enough wealth and were living in cities that were becoming denser, where they had this impetus to buy some land at the edge of the city, near enough so they could reach by horse and carriage, but far enough away so they could get away from the dense urban environment. This bird's eye view of Elmira from 1873 can show you how much it grew. So you remember the image you saw before of 1840, and here we are just 33 years later. There's a tremendous amount of expansion. And the reason for this, partly, was because there were people that came here who were industrial, and they really brought a lot of industry to the city and made it grow economically and also grow in population. So you can see the population grew. In 1860 it was less than 9,000, and it more than tripled by 1890. And one of these individuals who was responsible for this growth was the man of the evening, Jervis Langdon. Everyone is familiar with this image, I'm sure, on the right, on the left. And he was originally, well, he was born in 1809 in Vernon, which is in Oneida County, New York. He moved around quite a bit. He began working in country stores, and by 1838 he had migrated to Chemung County, and then Elmira he was here in 1845. He was originally engaged in the lumber trade, and then later moved on to coal exporting. In 1832, he married Olivia Lewis, and they adopted a child, Susan, and then had 2 children of their own, Olivia and Jervis. And then in the 1850s, they purchased an existing home that was at the corner of, and I say was because it's not there anymore, at the corner of Church and Main Streets, and really developed this home into a large urban estate. And you can see, this is a Sanborn map. The Sanborn Insurance Company did these fabulous maps of urban environments of properties it insured. And you can see the mansion, quite large. There was a greenhouse on the property, and then several other outbuildings, strategically located, of course, from across from the Park Church. And then this was the image of the home after the Langdons had enlarged it and modernized it. You have to admire the elms that were growing along Church Street, which were in perfect scale with the property. Yeah, but he had a beautiful cast iron fence, a lovely Victorian fountain. It was really quite a place. So in 1867, he purchased some property at the edge of the city. It was actually Fosnot's property. And he joined a movement that was sweeping the country at the time. There was a man from Newburgh named Andrew Jackson Downing. He was just a country boy. He had worked in his brother's nursery, and he became obsessed with English landscapes and the English landscape gardening. And through his review of those, he developed a theory where he believed that every individual was capable of bringing nature into their own environments, and that nature had restorative powers. And so it was to everyone's benefit to try to do what they could to bring that into their life. He published a book called The Treatise on the Theory and Practice of Landscape Gardening, adapted to North America in 1841. And this book was widely read. We went through several editions. It really became the domestic Bible for landscape gardening. This is what you do with your property. You really want to be doing it. And a number of the theories that he espoused in this guide were certainly something that Jervis Langdon latched onto. Now, Jervis Langdon only lived, he bought the property in 1867, he only lived a year. But his vision for the property, was fully articulated. And he did live to see some of it articulated. But I want to just show you exactly what some of Downing's theories were and how those took shape in the landscape at Quarry Farm. So the first is that the house should always be sited with a view. So, why buy a property out of town if you're not going to get something that's up on a hill where you have a fantastic view of some water and the valley below and get some nice breezes. So here we have the Quarry Farm, and you can see it's nicely situated on the crest of the hill with this beautiful view, of the city of Elmira. So right off the bat, he got the right property. The second is to create a long, meandering approach to the house. So why do you suppose that that's important? Other than exercise.
See who's coming.
You see them coming. Any other ideas? All right, well, this was sort of to tease the visitors, right? So you come in at the bottom of the slope, and you've got this long, you don't just drive right up to the house and into the garage. You take this long, gradual approach, and of course there are trees that are spotted along the way, so you get these glimpses all along the way. So you've not just got this open view, but you're going in and out of view of the house. You get different angles of the house. It's really a way to show off. And the driveway was the thing that did it. And this driveway was something Langdon envisioned, was built, and if you probably know today, it's still on remains, but we'll talk about that later. There should be a lawn surrounding the house. The lawn is important because it gives the property some breadth. Again, think about the house down on Main and Church. That was right in the middle of the city. You saw all those properties that were densely packed around it. This is a complete opposite of that in that you get all this breathing room, and part of that is produced by having a nice lawn that gives it it's kind of a skirt and a big sky. The plantings were meant to be arranged so that they would exaggerate nature and exaggerate the shape of the house. And this is a way to bring nature closer to you. So you can see here, this is a little bit later photo, but the trees that are framing the house, they're the same scale of the house, the same height, or a little bit higher, and they just bring the whole house up. And then, of course, vines. So this is the perfect plant to be as close to nature as possible. Here they are, not only engulfing this, what was a pergola and became a porch, or a portico here, which became a porch, but it's also providing shade. Carpet beds were also something that were important, and those were important because they provided drama and color, and they were in these sort of organic shapes, and they were always to be placed away from the house, not next to the house. One of the things that's important about this period is that foundation plantings that we know today, that probably everybody has around their house, were not in vogue at the time at all. The foundation was meant to be exposed, and because the foundations were built out of usually natural materials, stone or brick, and that would just be part of, again, inviting nature into your world. And then follies of all different types. Gazebos or gazebos, arbors, statues, urns, rustic seats. These are a couple of the images of some of the structures that were built on farm property. The left was called the arbor, that was located on the highest point. It was so rickety that it had to be rebuilt at least once. And you can see the thatched roof, and then just these kind of viney arbors around the openings to it, and it didn't have any walls at all. But it provided a place where there was shelter and also on the highest point, so you would get a nice view and a nice breeze. And on the right is the tent, which you probably have seen images of before. This is a little bit more substantial structure with more than a thatched roof. Its eaves actually held awnings, and then it was a place that the family could come and spend afternoons on a hot day and have a picnic. And rustic steps, perfect articulation of how circulation gets woven right into the natural environment. And these steps, as you know, still remain on the property. And then, of course, most importantly, probably of all, is the writer's studio. We know that Olivia Langdon married Samuel Clemens, and the studio stood on the property for a very long time. Married Olivia Langdon. Now, as I said, Jervis Langdon died in 1670, so he really never used the property much. He bequeathed it to his daughter, Susan, and she was the occupant of it for most of the rest of her life. First with her husband, who passed away, and then she remained on the property until her death in 1924. And she was really the one that fulfilled the vision of her father, and was the one who was responsible for having the study built in Mark Twain in 1874. The picturesque landscape remained here for many, many years until around 1902, where Susan started to venture out into other things, and the professor who gave the presentation beforehand hinted about that. She, as early as the 1870s, had begun purchasing land around the farm. Remember, it was only 37.5 acres, she was purchasing land around the farm and eventually amassed over 200 acres. And the reason for this is she was very invested in creating a dairy farm. There's a wonderful photo, I should say, a view photo of the farm that I had not seen before that I need to get a copy of. And you can see how open this landscape was. This aerial photo was actually taken in the 40s, but even so, the dairy operated up till 20 years before that, and so much of the land, the farm is right here, farmhouse, where we're sitting. So much of the land around it was cleared. We don't think of it that way today at all. So she had a lot of acreage. And if you look at the exhibit, you will understand that this was the first dairy farm in the county to comply with the Elmira Academy of Medicine's Milk Commission standards. So, there were a lot of dairy farms in the county at the time, and there was a great concern about the bacteria that was in milk. People became ill from it. And she was on a mission to change a lot of that and was the first to really achieve the Gold Star standard. She also was aggressive about getting motorized delivery of milk and had her own milk trucks. This is a Model TT, is that what it is? Model TT? Yeah. She did remove a lot of the follies that we saw, not the steps of the study, but some of those other follies that I showed earlier were removed. And I think she simplified the landscape. You can see here that the drive still exists, we have here, and the big trees that frame the house still exist, and the lawn. But below the lawn, that was the start of the farm. There was a dairy barn beyond that. And I know at one point she reveled in the fact that she could actually see cows grazing from her porch. So she died in 1924, and she left the property. She did not have children. She left the property to her nephew, also named Jervis, and his wife, Elmira. And they proceeded to convert the property into what we would call today a suburban home. Now, again, one of the reasons why suburbs grew up in this country was the invention of the cheap automobile. Excuse me for using that language. My grandfather was a Ford dealer for 60 years, so I guess I'm entitled to do that. But this is a picture of the Clute Motor Company showroom with the announcement of a brand new Ford that just rolled out, and you can see the bunting. I love this. The bunting and all the gentlemen in their hats and their top coats coming in, rushing in to see the new model. You've got to have it. And this was a way to really, it just changed so much about our landscape. They were less expensive, and they were advertised daily. The Elmira Star-Gazette had these ads almost every day. And, saying things like the ease of mind and sense of security in driving a Lincoln endures from the minute you open the throttle until you are back from the trip. Like, who even knows what a throttle is today, right? Maybe your lawnmower has one, but. So, they were the thing, and they were inexpensive, and there were a lot of them. So that allowed the Langdons to move to the farm. So they would no longer have to take a horse and buggy up to the top of the hill, and they could build a suburban home there. Now,
Is L.D. Clute your grandfather?
I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So the suburbs were growing not just to the east, they were growing to the north and the south and also west. On the west side of the city, there was a suburban neighborhood that was developed in the early 20s by the Strathmont Realty Corporation. Are people familiar with that? And it was a group of businessmen who pooled their resources, hired a landscape architect from Philadelphia to design the road network, to outfit the properties with water and sewer and stormwater, and to make those connections to the properties themselves. And this development, as well as many of the other in other homes in the west side of Elmira built at that time after the war, were built in this Tudor style. I was just here in August over on that side of the city, and I could not believe how many of them there were. These two properties are both at Strathmont Park, and then in the nearby abutting streets, there are quite a few of these. And what do you see in these that are just a thread, a trend? Anybody? What do you observe?
Tudor style.
Yes. Thank you, Elise. And what's common? What do they all hold in common?
Big lawns.
Big lawns, okay, yeah. All right. This is a very popular style in the country after World War I, and I consulted with my colleague who's an architectural historian, and Elise Johnson-Schmidt, who's here, is the architect of the farm, maybe it was a comment too. My colleague believed it was just nostalgia for jolly old England after the war.
Oh.
So whether that's true or not, I don't know. But these houses were very popular, and they had these wood timbers that were flat on the house and infill with stucco, some brick, and there's one house at Strathmont that I love with a drippy roof, one on the top. It probably has a name, right, Elise? The drippy roof. So, as you can see, the Langdons kind of latched onto the trend, right? And built this addition onto the farmhouse. And they also made some modifications to the landscape. One of the big ones that you can see here is the driveway. So now they had a vehicle, they could come up the hill in the car, and they kind of didn't really need that long serpentine drive up to the house. They could just create something that a lot of these other houses had, which were these circular drives that would bring you in one way and take you out another, and the front door would kind of be right at the middle of all of that. And that's what we have here. They also put in some foundation plantings. That was very in vogue. And why do you think foundation plantings came about and became popular? Do you have them at your house?
Yeah, and I don't like them.
Does everyone have them at their house where they live?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay. Why did they become popular?
Ugly foundations.
That's very right. Yes, they were meant. It was when concrete came into vogue as a cheaper material, and they were meant to hide the foundation because it was not considered to be attractive. So the Langdons did put some foundation plantings in. And the serpentine driveway remained in place, but it gradually just sort of disappeared into the lawn, and that's where it is today. They also maintain a small gardening operation out in the back. There had been one for a long time, even when the dairy was going, and they kept that going. They had a gardener on staff that I'm not going to talk about tonight, a German gardener that they had hired, and was with the farm for a long time. And then gradually, you can see that the view that was so sought after by the original Jervis Langdon began to fill in. And you can see the growth of some trees in the foreground. So the city is not so visible, and that's just the way nature behaves. And again, the growth eventually just enshrouded the study. It became vandalized as we know in the 1950s. Jervis Langdon had moved to the campus of Elmira College, where it sits today in its cozy little setting. Okay, so here we are today. It's a lovely property that's now 6 acres in size. It was given to the college in the end of 1983 by Jervis Langdon Jr. And there are some features of the original Langdon estate, the country estate, still remaining. What are those? Now you're experts, you should tell me. No observations?
The large lawn.
Large lawn,
Big lawn,
Tall trees.
tall trees, some of them may be original, yep. Anything else?
The porch.
The porch? Okay. So these are great observations, and this is exactly what we're involved in, is we are trying to identify what remains in the landscape of its different periods that we just went through. What was removed, we might want to bring back, and what's been placed there since that kind of needs to go. And so as we move through the long-range planning for this, we will be identifying those things. Again, with the goal of trying to bring this landscape more alive for scholars, so we have a fuller understanding of the Quarry Farm property in its entirety, in addition to the fabulous work that Elise is doing on the poem